Spoke a moment ago of the situation in Tyre. Our senior reporter Catherine Norris-Trench, just back from covering the war in Lebanon, saw firsthand the scale of the humanitarian crisis in Beirut and in the south, close to the front line as well. We're going to speak to Catherine in a moment. First, this is her story explaining the situation in Tyre of the past few days.
Inside the ancient city of Tyre in southern Lebanon, buildings lie in ruins following recent Israeli airstrikes. A handful of locals have returned to survey the bomb site that was their neighbourhood.
May Netanyahu's father be damned. Who's bombing us here? Israel? America? This is Netanyahu. They're killing women and children. Why did they strike us here? Everyone who was here was my neighbour. What was here?
We will resist. We're going to rebuild the mosque so we can pray here once again. We will never leave Lebanon. We're going to stay here. We were born here and we're going to die here, and that's that.
Early on that morning, Israel had ordered civilians to evacuate their homes. Ali scrambled to get his family out.
We were sleeping when we got the warning to evacuate and go north. We had our children with us. We didn't know where to go apart from the port. So we just left and took the children, with nothing but the clothes we had on, and sheltered there.
We're escorted to the scene of the strikes by a minder linked to Hezbollah. We are told for our safety. A portrait of Hassan Nasrallah hangs in the street, and this poster reads, "With our blood we will buy our freedom." A few hundred metres away we visit another blast site. Israel said it targeted command and control headquarters of Hezbollah's southern front. The debris of homes ripped apart lies all around.
This is one of the buildings in Tyre which was recently destroyed by Israeli airstrikes. We're told 2 missiles fell here and, well, the entire building was destroyed.
I'm 76-year-old, and this period is the worst we have ever been through here. It usually lasts for a month, then life gets going again. But now everything is destroyed here. We've got no work, no food, no money. No one is helping us. They just say that God will help us, and that's all.
As the war between Israel and Hezbollah has dragged on, there's been an exodus from Tyre. This couple of migrant workers from Bangladesh now among the displaced. This once bustling port city and tourist hub has become eerily quiet. Less than 1/10 of the pre-war population remains. Tyre is bracing for what comes next, with Israel carrying out near constant airstrikes on the villages surrounding the port city.
Catherine is with us now. Hello, Catherine.
Hi.
It's an old adage that to tell a story properly, you have to narrow the distance between yourself and the story, to be there, to see it. And it's very easy seeing kind of like a wave of images, very depressing images of war, and kind of get lost in it as an audience. But you're there, you're seeing this. Just tell us the difficulties in operating, what you're seeing around these places, what's going on behind the camera.
So it is a difficult place to work, but you're absolutely right. I think the only way to properly cover a situation, well, I would say this, I guess, given my job, but is to go on the ground and speak to people and see the situation there, because things always look very different from afar than when you go there. Access is difficult. Access is a problem for 2 main reasons. Partly because it's dangerous. There are Israeli airstrikes, and we know journalists have been targeted. There were 3 journalists killed recently in an airstrike, even though their cars were marked with press, and they were known to be sleeping in these hotels used by journalists. So that is something that we obviously keep in mind, the safety, because we want to be able to come back as well as tell the story. And then there's also the access, because a lot of these southern zones are controlled by Hezbollah and other groups, or at least you have to have some kind of authorization from them to go there. And so and they're very suspicious of foreigners at the moment. They're worried about infiltration. They're worried about giving away their locations. It's a war situation. So we see this in every war we cover at the moment, but this is something that's particularly difficult. To get the access we need to go on the ground and speak to people is a huge challenge in this area. So every time we go out from Beirut into the south, it has to be very carefully planned, and we try and warn all parties about where we're going to try and reduce the risk and to try and be able to bring the report home.
I remember a few weeks ago, before October the 1st, before the incursion started, and we were talking to Lebanon Tyre, a correspondent in Beirut, who was saying actually Hezbollah were organising press tours of Beirut. They were quite open. This is before the death of Hassan Nasrallah, its leader in an apartment block there. You've been back and forth. Did you see a change in that dynamics about how Hezbollah is operating?
Yeah, I think so. I think there was a point initially after those pager explosions, walkie-talkie explosions, and also the death of Nasrallah when there was an opening up, because Hezbollah clearly had an interest in showing to the world's press the damage from the strikes and telling their side of the story. And as is often the case with a developing story that goes on for several weeks, after the initial opening happens, well, the access tightens up again. So, Hezbollah still have press contacts that you call, and they still do press conferences, although the last one in Beirut had to be evacuated because the Israeli army said they were going to bomb that site and ordered everyone to evacuate. So a lot of journalists left pretty quickly from that, let me tell you. So they do have a media operation. They have media channels which they use to convey their discourse, their dialogue. And they're doing less of those media tours than they were, but they still are doing them. Remember when the Israeli spokesman for the IDF came on TV and said, we think there's gold and billions of dollars cash stored in a bunker below such and such a hospital, the Al Sahel hospital, in fact, in southern Beirut, and he put out a plan and graphics. Well, guess what? The next morning, that hospital called up in southern Beirut, Hezbollah stronghold, and said, come on, the international press, come and have a look in the hospital and let us have some access to the hospital. The Israelis said, you're not looking in the right place. The accesses to those tunnels are in the buildings nearby, and access to those places is more risky. But, it's a war of communication. It's a communications war. And so both sides have their media operations. So what we try and do when we do those reports is we do the reports and then we say, who allowed us to film there? How did we get that access? How long could we spend on the ground? When I filmed that report in Tyre with my colleagues the other day, they said initially you can have 45 minutes inside the city. In the end, that turned into an hour and a half. But, we asked where we could go. We were allowed to speak to who we wanted, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a difficult thing. You push for as much access as you can, but the access is limited.
When you look at the situation in the capital, for anybody who's been to Beirut, you will know, before war, it's around the Corniche, around the port. This is a massively bustling place. People drinking coffee, in terraces. There's a similar kind of, it's not cliche, but Parisian vibe to on the streets. When you saw it in recent weeks, we're hearing about so many people camped, sleeping in the streets. Just describe to us what it's like walking around there.
Yeah, it really depends what neighbourhood you're in. There are displaced people on the Corniche in Beirut, people with nowhere to go, families who don't know what to go, some of them Syrian families who've been displaced several times from war in their own country, then different places in Lebanon, Lebanese people as well. More still arriving in the capital, on the roads into Beirut. You can see, trucks piled up with furniture, clearly another family fleeing their homes. So you do see that. And every morning for the past week or so we were there, we saw smoke rising from those southern suburbs of Beirut, which were, very often the target of overnight airstrikes. But in some areas, shops and bars are open. People are going about their daily business. On edge, of course, worried about what comes next. But it really depends where you are in the city, just how dangerous it is. So it's localized to specific places. Although, Israel has hit targets in the center of Beirut, and people are really worried that they could strike anywhere now. So there is a kind of fear and a worry about how long this could drag on for as well.
Very briefly, one thing that we keep hearing, keep requesting is access to go into Gaza with the IDF. Now, that was being given short embeds, at least, at the beginning. That seems to have stopped completely. But what you're telling us, particularly about the hospital incident, demonstrate to us the need to be there.
Absolutely. We need to go there. And we should say that France 24, like all other international media, is not allowed and hasn't been allowed from the beginning of this conflict into Gaza independently. So there have been embeds, but they've dried up in recent times. So it's a question of doing an embed in southern Lebanon. That didn't happen. But the access to Gaza for the international press is a huge issue. I know Palestinian journalists are doing an amazing job, but it's still something we need to push for.
at a time where the UN is describing this as the darkest moments unfolding as we're seeing. Catherine, thank you so much. Catherine Norris-Trent, our senior reporter.